Where do I sit?
It's just wow.
What's the deal?
You're going, Steve.
Oh, I'm ready for my close-up, man. There you go. How's that?
Stay there.
Oh, we're ready to go? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this evening's meeting of the Hagerstown City Board of Zoning Appeals. We have two matters on our revised agenda this evening. My name is Brian Kurtika. I'm the chairman of the board, and with me tonight are Aaron Smith and Jim Stauffer, two other board members. There's three of us, and that is sufficient for us to have a quorum tonight. I'm going to read off a little bit about our order of procedure so that you understand how we run our meeting tonight. With me also is our zoning administrator, Steve Mockmiller, and our board secretary, Debbie Calhoun. The decisions and cases heard tonight are based on general and specific criteria as enumerated in the City Land Management Code. This is an administrative proceeding. As such, it will be conducted just as if it were a court of law, except that we will not follow as strictly the rules of evidence. Everyone who wishes to be heard on a particular case will be heard. Each of the cases will be heard in the order filed with the board. We will first hear from the applicant, then all witnesses in favor of the application, all witnesses in opposition to the application, then, if necessary, final remarks from the applicant. We will then take the case under advisement. Once the two cases are over, we will likely deliberate on both cases unless we have other issues to address that can't be resolved in one night. And if we do reach a decision tonight, then we will issue a written decision and order for the case within 45 days. You're welcome to stay after the hearing and listen to our deliberations, but you're not required to. We'll still, if we reach a decision, you'll be notified. During our deliberations, the only discussion that will occur is between the board members and occasionally with Mr. Bachmiller. Right to appeal. Once we issue our written decision and order, you have 30 days to take an appeal if you choose to the Circuit Court for Washington County. And that is anyone who is aggrieved by the decision, not just the applicant, but surrounding landowners as well if they are have standing or can make a case for standing. The rules that we have tonight are only two. Only remarks that we will consider are those that are given from the witness chair under oath. So if you're going to speak, I will swear you in and then we will hear from you. So if somebody calls out from the back, we will ignore those comments until that person comes forward and is sworn in. We ask that you confine your remarks to things that are pertinent to the appeal and the application. So with that, I will ask our zoning administrator to call off our first case, Z 2020-06.
Okay, this is Z 2020-06. The applicant is the Arc of Washington County. Property is located in the POM zoning district. Site location, this involves two adjacent properties at 820 and 840 Florida Avenue. The request is variances to reduce the required 10-foot side yard setback to 0 feet for two adjacent properties in order to construct a covered walkway between the two buildings. This application is being made for the reason that under Article 4, Section F5A, the required side setback is 10 feet in the POM zoning district. Deadline for written decision is August 29th. As far as the standards that you would review the application for, this is a variance. And as such, you have 6 standard variance criteria in the zoning ordinance by which you would evaluate them. I would also just point out a couple of things. We actually have a provision in the CG zoning district to allow 0 lot line or attached development, almost like commercial townhouses. We just don't happen to have that in the POM district. In this particular case, they're looking to take and connect 2 buildings on separate lots, which otherwise is not permitted by the zoning ordinance, but similar development is permitted in other commercial zoning districts.
Okay. All right, so we have our applicant for this case, 2020-06. Mr. Schreiber.
Good evening. My name is Ed Schreiber with Frederick Seibert and Associates. Office is located at 128 South Potomac Street in Hagerstown, Maryland.
Okay, if you'll stand,
I'm
raise your
sorry.
right hand. Do you solemnly promise and declare under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you are about to give this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you may proceed.
As I was saying, our offices were hired by the architect who was hired by the owner applicant, the Arc of Washington County, to prepare a site plan for some improvements to the parking lot as well as to do a civil engineering site plan to connect the 2 buildings by way of a pavilion style or canopy crosswalk between the 2 buildings. If you take a look at the packet that I had provided, there are some photographs where you can kind of see a before and after. The very last page of that packet would show an existing conditions plan, which as you pull onto the site now, it's somewhat confusing as to where it is you need to go and what building is what, as they are kind of separated by just about 70 feet of distance between the 2 buildings now. And there's a property line that runs right through the middle of the drive aisle all the way up between these 2 buildings. So we're talking about the client building as well as the administrative building. And again, if you were to pull in the lot today, it would be kind of confusing as to where am I supposed to go, what am I supposed to do? So this site plan was designed, site plan and the architecture was designed to kind of pull everything together in a more cohesive type campus style atmosphere. So as going through the site plan process, it was discovered that by connecting the 2 buildings, the canopy that was going to be connecting the 2 would infringe on the 10-foot side yard setbacks of 2 separate lots, because again, the buildings are on individual lots. With that being said, We since prepared the appeal case and are looking to, I mean, the final product would look something what is on the very last page of the packet, which shows the proposed, I guess, finished product of the walkway and the drop-off area for cars and such. And in going over some of the regulations that are required to be proven or brought out as to why we believe the variance is necessary, one of the first item is to explain the unique physical conditions associated with the property and how strict compliance to the letter of the regulations would unreasonably prevent the owner from using property for permitted purpose, would render conformity with such restrictions unnecessarily burdensome. And in this case, although the buildings are separate from one another, they are on separate lots. Said lots are owned by the same entity, and the overall operation and of this area, of these buildings, is to function as a campus, not individual buildings, that is owned and operated separately. So strict compliance would prevent the construction of the protective cover for when clients are picked up and dropped off and moving from building to building. So now staff, and as well as the clients, would be exposed to the elements moving from one building to the next, and this is going to provide cover for that. Again, these lots are, or these buildings are on separate properties. However, we're trying to create more of a cohesive type campus atmosphere where the buildings all kind of work with one another. Item B, explain how the requested variances are the minimum reasonably necessary to overcome the conditions described above. Because the reductions will provide the maximum variance permitted, allowing a 0-foot setback on both sides of the property line, this is why this will allow the canopy to traverse from one property to the next. Anything less than 0 would do no good. And as Mr. Bachmiller had previously mentioned, in other commercial zoning districts, this type of development is permitted where you have a 0 lot line. It just hasn't found its way to the POM zoning just yet. Item C, explain how enforcement of the provision from which the variance is requested would deprive the property owner of uses commonly enjoyed by similar properties in the same district. Because of the existing small lot size, strict enforcement of this site, given the overall size of this operation, would deprive the applicant maximization of the overall building area. In essence, again, because there are setbacks that have to be adhered to on each individual lot, not being able to utilize this with 0 lot lines is kind of hindering us because of the existing 10-foot setbacks on each lot. And that's why we're asking for the reduction. Item D, explain how the variances requested would not confer special treatment on the applicant. Because the buildings are on separate lots and are under the same ownership, setbacks are generated for each building rather than the overall campus. Again, going back to the campus atmosphere of trying to have everything work as one. If there were not property lines between the buildings, there would not be a need for the variances. So in essence, if we can more or less say there are no setbacks, we don't have to worry about, or the setbacks are reduced to 0, we don't have to worry about not being able to cross over them. Item E, explain how the property owner or applicant has not created the conditions that they now use as justification for seeking the variance. Over the years, the organization has changed over the years, and the needs for the buildings have changed over the ownership over the 30 years. Property lines have not been extinguished primarily because of financing reasons that many lending institutions do not like the idea of having numerous buildings on one big lot. And that's one of the primary reasons, and we just didn't feel it was necessary at this point to have to abandon the property lines. Explain how the requested variance would not be contrary to the intent of the zoning ordinance and will not be injurious to the neighborhood or public welfare. Granting the variance will not only improve the function of the facility, construction of the canopy and parking circulation improvements will only make it safer for the users of the property, but will also enhance the overall perspective from the surrounding properties. This is only going to enhance the neighborhood with the improvements that are being done, and I think you can see that on the architect's rendering of how much it will improve the facade and the functionality of the site, parking, as well as pedestrian access to the property. So with that being said, in summation, again, what we're trying to do is create more of a campus atmosphere with the property lines in between the two buildings. We cannot join them without having to request a variance from 10 feet down to 0 feet. And the fact that other similar zoning districts carry that provision to allow that to zero lot line development, we request that you consider the variances as presented.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for the applicant's representative? No. Okay. Mr. Schreiber, when did the current owner take possession of this property? Do you know?
Approximately
How long?
30 years ago.
30 years ago?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And at that time, was the property two separate?
No, it was not. Somewhere over the course, I think it was probably 20 to 25 years ago, maybe even closer to 30 years ago, it was subdivided. I don't know the exact rationale or the reasoning behind that. I can only imagine it had something to do with lending and grants and things of that nature, that one building cannot support the other building on different properties and such. That's been my experience with today's lending standards. A lot of times developers have to have separate lease agreements or actual subdivided lots, not to have a lien on one property carry over to another proposed building, and that's probably why it was done.
Okay. And is the Arc of Washington County the actual owner of the property?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yes,
So there's no leases involved?
correct.
Okay. And the construction of both of these buildings, these are the original structures
Yes, I believe
on each lot?
the one on the left, the client building was built first, I believe, and then I believe the administration building was built after that. Both steel buildings primarily. I think they've been retrofitted throughout the years. And this is to kind of enhance the exterior and tie it all together.
Okay.
There are a couple other buildings behind these properties, behind these buildings that you can't really see except for on the aerial photograph that I provided,
Right.
which might give you a little bit better perspective as to where this sits on the campus.
I'm also holding two previous requests for variance that it looks like there were other setback lines that were addressed, not this particular one, but others. And just wanted to make sure that this looks like it's a completely separate thing. It's not like we're granting another variance to an already existing variance. The architectural rendering that you've done shows like an open corridor, if you will, that is has that canopy over top
Yes,
between the two buildings, and then you have this looks like a curved driveway that's going underneath of the brick structure.
correct, with the canopy over top of that to
Okay.
pick up and drop off clients and employees.
Okay, so we have almost like a T design?
Correct.
You know, the canopy area, or the corridor area here with the canopy drop off here.
Correct.
Okay. And so this canopy is physically the corridored structure is being physically attached to the two buildings?
Yes, that is correct, yes.
Okay, it's not freestanding. And it looks like the brick drop-off is detached. I mean, it appears to be, maybe oh, I see. No, I can see now that it's connected to the,
It
To the
kind
corridor,
of shares
yeah.
the same support
I
structure
see it now.
with the roof kind of going over top of the walkway canopy.
Yeah, no, I see it. Okay. So it is tied together, all right. All right, thank you, and we will come back to you if necessary.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Is there anybody here to speak in favor of the application, other than Mr. Schreiber? Okay, hearing none. Anybody who would like to speak in opposition to the application? None there. Okay. All right. We will hold this case for deliberation and move on to our next case. Miller, the next case, please.
Okay, this is case Z 2020-07. The applicant is Alan Holman. Property is located in the R-Mod zoning district. Property is located at 513 Reynolds Avenue. The request is a variance to reduce the required front yard setback from Summit Avenue to 18 feet for enclosure of an existing porch. This application is being made for the reason that under Article 4, Section D5A, the required front setback is 25 feet in the R-Mod zoning district. Deadline for written decision is August 29th. Again, in the same as you had in the previous case, you have the 6 criteria in the ordinance for evaluating requests for variances. Just as a quick summary, this is a house that's probably over 100 years old. It's built with a recessed porch. They're looking to enclose it. It's not going to go any closer to the street than another portion of the main part of the house already is. So it's not an additional or further incursion or closer incursion into the setback.
Okay. So this is not like one we had a couple months ago, or it's
Correct.
actually coming further into the setback area.
That is correct.
Okay.
And do we have the ability to do street view and stuff on there if necessary, correct? Okay, just checking. And we received no comments from any of the other boards.
Okay, thank you. Notes here. All right, if you'll stay standing for just a moment, let me read this off to you. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly promise and declare under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you are about to give this board shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yeah.
Okay. State your name and address for the record, please.
My name's Alan Holman. I'm the owner of 513 Reynolds Avenue, Hagerstown, Maryland.
Thank you. All right, what would you like to tell us today?
And so first, Stephen and Debbie, thank you so much for the help in getting this in front of the board and for all your help in my questions, figuring out how to do this. I'm not a professional, just a homeowner working through this, so thank you. I think your summary was really good. It's an old house, more than 100 years old. You can see right in this picture here, that's the existing porch that's already within the setback. The house was built before that zoning ordinance existed, and so it's within what today should be 25 feet. We're not proposing to add anything on to bring it any closer to the street. All we want to do with the porch is to enclose it with French windows. And on the side here where you see the arch where our front door is on Reynolds, to put a front door on that arch. So we're not changing the frontage. It will still be a Reynolds address. We're just going to put a door there to enclose it so that the entire porch is enclosed.
Okay, so your property main entrance is on Reynolds.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I need to correct one thing from my initial presentation. I misstated something. The porch itself sticks about 2 feet out past the front of the Summit Avenue side of the building. So what I said, it wasn't going to be any closer, wasn't quite correct. It's going to be about 2 feet closer, but it is still going to be within the existing porch.
Right, there's no new building any
Right.
closer.
No new
But-
footprint.
Nothing
But
coming
the
in.
frontage it'll be closer on Summit Avenue in that we're creating a room by enclosing it.
Okay.
But there will be no new construction that brings it closer to the road.
If it wasn't coming any closer, actually, we have a provision in the ordinance that would just allow us to approve it. But in this particular case, because it's coming closer, that's what kicked it into the variance.
So the variance that we're asking for is the minimum amount to allow us to put the windows up. We're not building any closer, but that variance would allow us to then enclose that porch.
Okay.
And this is because the house was built before that ordinance existed. When we look around the neighborhood, we see that we're not asking for anything special. There's other existing homes that front on the street closer than our house even does within that 18 feet. So they're either,
Mhm.
5 feet or 10 feet. There's many in the neighborhood that are similar or even closer to the street. And there's also converted porches where someone has taken an open porch and enclosed it through, the 100 years that our neighborhood has existed. So it's not anything that only we are doing within the neighborhood. And then from how the house sits, because we're on the corner, as you come to the circle, you can't see it, it's over here. I don't know if this is before the circle actually. So as you come to the circle, you can see straight, left, right. Nothing by enclosing the porch is going to obstruct any view of traffic. It's barely noticeable to anyone from the street or the sidewalk because of the trees and how we already have the house structured.
Yeah, I think from the aerial view that we have, you can see where the porch would be.
Mhm.
And it's clearly back far enough, and this does show the circle.
Yeah,
So it's back far enough that it's not going to infringe on anybody's view. Any drivers?
and obviously all these, the original building and the zoning ordinance were all prior to us even owning the house. So it's not something that we could have planned for.
All right. So for your benefit, Mr. Holman, I'm going to walk you through the requirements for the criteria that need to be satisfied for this. And if there's anything that you think of for each of these that you haven't already said, please feel free to let us know what your thoughts are on that. The first one is the uniqueness of the property, unique condition of the property due to exceptional narrowness, shallowness, shape, topographical conditions, or other unusual situations or conditions peculiar to the specific property or the use of the property. The strict application of these regulations would result in peculiar or unusual practical difficulties to or undue hardship upon yourself as the owner of the property.
Mhm.
So what I hearing you say at first is the uniqueness of this property is more the positioning on the corner and the fact that this is something that is it's a home that's over 100 years old, predates zoning
Yeah,
ordinance.
I think it would be where it sits because if you scroll to the right a little bit, it's actually 2 lots. The side lot that we have here that was originally probably at some point going to be another house. And then our house here. And, Stephen said if he was going to approve something to build today, it would be 7 feet farther that way. And there's nothing we can do about that. You wouldn't let me build the porch where it is today, let alone enclose it if I was building a new house.
Okay.
And even to build that porch where the house sits, we couldn't we couldn't put a room on the house with the setback that's there today.
Okay. All right. The second criterion is that this is the minimum reasonably necessary to overcome unusual conditions applicable to the property.
Mhm.
You mentioned that the windows and the doors or door are going to be within the
Correct.
vertical line of the existing porch where
Exactly.
it sits.
Yeah, we're not
Everything's just
adding
going up.
anything closer to the
It's not
street.
getting
It's
closer.
the minimum setback to just put windows on the existing structure.
Okay. The third criterion, compliance would preclude common use. And that means that if we literally interpreted the provisions of the article, it would deprive you of uses commonly enjoyed by other similar properties in the same district. So
Yeah.
you mentioned that there are other homes in the area that do have enclosed porches.
Correct.
And did you also state that they appear to be closer to the,
There are other homes within our district that are closer to the street than we are,
than what you're?
both on the side and in the front of their house.
Okay.
And there are other enclosed porches in our district that are closer or as close as.
All right. Criterion 4 is no special privilege. Granting the variance will not confer on you any special privilege that is denied by this article to other lands or structures with the same zoning.
Again, I think that there's other porches that exist, there's other homes that exist as close as or closer to the street. And it's just due to the, how old our house and how old our district is that we don't conform with these. So it's nothing, I guess, special for us that we're asking for this, that other people don't enjoy in some other way.
Okay. Criterion 5, self-created hardship. No variance shall be granted in any case where the applicant, owner, or agent has created or caused to be created a situation which would or has necessitated the issuance of a variance in order for the property to comply with this article. Was this porch all built before you took ownership?
Yep, the
Okay.
porches existed. We have a picture from the 20s that the porch is already there.
Okay.
So,
That's good. And then the last criterion is that the application for the variance is consistent with the intent of the ordinance. So if we granted this, the property would remain in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance and would not be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the public welfare.
correct.
So as you've stated, I think by keeping it within the same vertical envelope of your porch, you've attempted to make it so that it's not any more intruding upon the setbacks.
Correct. Yeah, it's the minimum for that porch to be enclosed and it doesn't impede on any lines from other people's properties or from traffic.
Okay. All right. Okay. Any other questions from the board? Aaron, anything? Okay. All right. I will ask now if there is anybody else who is speaking in favor of the application tonight? Anybody in opposition to the application? Okay, we will close that testimony for that matter. And we will proceed to our deliberations in the order that we heard the cases tonight. The first being the ARC property at 820 and 840 Florida Avenue. Okay, so as I just finished with Mr. Homan, I'm going to do the same thing for this matter with our board. Let's walk through the variances and make sure that we're considering each of the criteria as presented here. We had Mr. Shriver, the agent for the applicant, discuss the unique condition of this property. And probably have 3 folders for this case. There we go. Okay. He mentioned that this is a campus-style arrangement for this particular property. 2 buildings on separately platted lots, same owner. And the lots are contiguous. And we have the buildings that are currently situated approximately 78 feet apart. And the applicant is seeking to construct a canopy to connect the 2 buildings, and from that canopy, a drop-off area would be attached. Go over top of a driveway in front of the buildings. We have So one thing that is unusual about this is the fact that this is, in addition to other factors, is its ownership of these 2 parcels is identical. We've got 2 buildings that have been constructed that are used by the same nonprofit organization, one for administration and one for, looks like, programmatic matters. And we have an exposed walkway between the 2 buildings that currently crosses over travel lanes. And so my assumption here is that you've got people going back and forth from one building to the next, and they are having to go across the travel lanes. This application would eliminate the travel lanes between the 2 buildings with the canopy structure and the drop-off area. So I think this could be interpreted as that is an unusual situation or condition, that you've got jointly owned buildings on 2 separately platted lots used for the same purpose, that is somewhat unique or different from the way other similarly situated properties in this district are owned and or operated today. And that by strictly applying this, you would continue to allow the practical difficulties of personnel having to walk back and forth between the buildings through travel lanes, exposed to the weather. And as Mr. Schreiber pointed out, difficulty in persons coming up who are unfamiliar with the campus of knowing which building to go to. This would allow a central drop-off point and signage that would make perhaps that easier than it is currently. Minimum necessary to overcome the unusual conditions. Well, it's the minimum because otherwise you've got the same exposure to the elements. You're creating a gap. If you stick to the 10-foot setbacks, you're going to have a 20-foot gap between the 2 sides of the canopy. That kind of negates the purpose of having a canopy walkway, and would take away from the aesthetic and functional use of this architectural structure. And so, as Mr. Sharper pointed out, I think this is the minimum necessary to overcome those conditions. Would compliance preclude common use? Would this deprive the applicant of uses commonly enjoyed by other similar properties? There's probably not too many similar properties that have joint ownership. A company using two separate buildings, one on each parcel. But would it deprive the applicants of uses commonly enjoyed? I'm not sure if I can identify a similar property. Similar properties. I'll hold on that for a moment. No special.
Could we ask
privilege.
Mr. Buckmiller to identify if there are any other similar properties to take into account?
If you're aware of any?
Two separate freestanding buildings connected by a covered walkway. I'm sure there's got to be
Common
something out there
ownership.
somewhere, but I'm not.
I think you just have to look past the fact that it's got the property line down the middle. I mean, that'd be something you'd see that everywhere else,
Yeah.
with the breezeway connecting.
And the fact that this is something that is allowed in other commercial zoning districts, the two buildings are connecting this way, and the structure is not like infringing back out onto the frontage of the property. You know, it just seems like this is
Yeah.
something that is,
Set back.
it's back off the
Yeah.
main road.
I pass this building every day, so I'm very familiar with it. Yes.
If they had built it, the skyway that was going to connect the Barbara Ingram expansion to those other buildings on West Washington Street will be
Mhm.
similar, although that particular zoning district doesn't have setback requirements.
Right,
Mhm.
right.
That's an example had it been built.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Typically, when we're talking about, typically, one of the things we consider when we're dealing with variances is how is this affecting other properties around it? You know, we had the one case a couple weeks ago where, you know, the deck was going to be closer to the property behind it, with the roof structure over the top. And, you know, in that situation, you're in a residential district, and you've got to be mindful of people looking out their side window. They had that big bay window on the side. Now all of a sudden the deck is coming closer to them. That's something that you want to make sure that the other property owners aren't, their aesthetics aren't being damaged, what they see out their windows. And in this case, you've got the two buildings looking this way. It's not really infringing on surrounding properties and the aesthetics of it. But I don't think it complies. I don't think compliance would preclude it would deprive the applicant of uses commonly enjoyed if you had a similar property like this, simply because of the dividing line between the two properties. Is it conferring a special privilege denied by this article to other lands or structures with the same zoning? Special privilege denied by this article to other lands or structures with the same zoning. I mean, we've had 0-foot setback requests in the past. Special privilege. And I don't know that we have, I'm not certain that we've denied special privilege is denied by this article to other lands or structures of the same zoning.
And I would say that it doesn't, only from the standpoint that anybody else can ask for the same thing, or any other organization.
They can,
ask.
no, of course they can ask for the same thing, yeah. It's not I mean, anybody can ask for a variance. Is it conferring a special privilege if we grant this? that would be denied to other lands or structures with the same zoning. And, it's going to be dependent upon what that other property looks like. I can conceive of other properties, not actual properties, but I can conceive in my mind where somebody would need a 0 to go right up to the lot line. And in certain circumstances, it may be permissible to do so, depending on what that setback line faces. What is it going? Is it going into a wooded area that's, preserved? Nobody's ever going to build there. It's opening up onto a, parking lot or something. I mean, you could have a 0 foot that would be granted.
But if you have anybody else who has two properties joining property line, they can ask for the same thing and potentially get it. I don't think this would preclude them from having.
I don't think we would rule it out. Self-created hardship.
That one,
This one is a little harder for me.
right.
We've
The fact
got-
that they divided the property.
We've got a property division and we've got construction of the buildings the way they are by the owner.
I think the reasoning was like funding
Yeah,
to the state.
right. We heard that. Create a situation.
That's the one that hung me up to until kind of went over that, why it was there.
Well, self-created hardships sometimes are, I built a deck or I built my structure and it's crossing the setback line. And now I'm coming back into the board and asking for relief because I did something intentionally that
Mhm.
violated. This is not a situation where they have done something that is in violation of the ordinance. They're simply seeking to not violate the ordinance by obtaining a variance so that they can construct their canopy and quarters for this. Has created or caused to be created a situation which would or has necessitated the issuance of a variance in order for such a property to comply with this ordinance. Let's hold on that a second. Consistent with the intent of the ordinance, the granting of the variance will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the article and will not be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the public welfare. Certainly, the architectural renderings look very pleasant, give a more campus feel and aesthetic to the buildings. And appears to be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the article. And I don't think it would be injurious to the neighborhood or detrimental to public welfare. It's improving the property. It's making it look nicer and giving persons a better entry and exit when they use the property. So I think 6 is satisfied. Let me go back to 5 here. Created or caused to be created a situation which would or has necessitated the issuance of a variance. In order for such property to comply with this.
Mr. Chairman,
Mhm.
what if you look at it from the standpoint of them needing to maintain 2 separate properties they mentioned due to financing
For the financing
reasons?
purposes.
And as a practical matter, it's going to look like one property anyway.
Right. And you can't, I mean, you're not creating I don't think you're creating a hardship in a, for lack of a better word, a selfish or intentional manner when you're doing it, at the direction of your lenders who, have a reason for wanting the properties to stay separate, and the structures to remain where they are. So, that would essentially take care of 4 and 5. I think it's not a special privilege because they've done something that is necessary for them to operate their properties and to obtain financing therefore. And they've not done this intentionally or even unknowingly to create the hardship, but it's just the circumstances that have surrounded their operations and the financing of the buildings and property themselves.
And if you're concerned with long-term impact, you could always put a condition on it saying that should the properties fall out of common ownership at some point in the future, be removed.
And yeah, the canopy would have to either have to be pulled back to the setback lines. Or they'd have to have common ownership and used for common purpose, something along those lines. We could do that too.
And by the way, I did find an existing example of two buildings that are connected by such a covered feature. I don't know if they're on separate properties. There is a skyway that connects the two buildings at the Venice,
Okay.
but I don't know if there's any property lines
Yeah.
going between the buildings or not.
Yeah. Because I know, I can't remember if they were selling all that together or not. And they sold it off the one time. Yeah, I'd have to look at a map on that. I don't think that that's quite as, and that just lends more to the argument that there's not many properties that are like this. If we aren't sure, if it didn't have common a line running between them and it was still being used by the same owner, that makes it even more unique. Okay. All right. Are we satisfied that the criteria have been satisfied for this application? I'll ask for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the variances as requested based on the testimony for as long as the properties share common ownership and common purpose.
Okay.
Second.
Second. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. 3-0. All right, we'll move on to the second matter for tonight. Put this together here. This is case 2020-07, 513 Reynolds Avenue. Mr. Holman, the applicant, testified they would like to build, add French windows and doors to the existing open porch, and I'm assuming a roof over the top of those windows and doors to enclose it all in from the elements. Unique condition of the property. Okay. Unusual situations or conditions peculiar to the specific parcel of property or the use of the property. Mr. Holman has stated that the house was built prior to the required setbacks and also prior to the existing ordinance in general. Strict application of the regulations result in peculiar or unusual practical difficulties to or undue hardship upon the owner of the property. We'd have this property located at an intersection. So the front yard is on Reynolds, the side yard is on Summit. And the current setback is 25 feet. And the current porch, the existing porch, exists 5 feet over top of that existing setback. So the porch itself, which predates the zoning ordinance, currently encroaches over the setback line, but the addition of the windows and the doors would stay within that envelope, vertical distance above the existing porch. So there's no way to construct a enclosure on this porch without chopping off 5 feet of the porch. Essentially, you'd have to pull it all back onto the porch. Um, Okay. So strictly applying that to this, I guess you could say that that would be a peculiar practical difficulty, trying to, you know, enclose a portion of the porch to stay within the setback line. Come back to that in a moment. The variance request is a minimum reasonably necessary to overcome the unusual conditions applicable to the property. Well, if the unusual condition is considered to be the location of the porch that is already over top of the setback line, this would be the minimum necessary to completely enclose the porch.
It's not being built out.
Not being
anything like
built
that.
out, right, on it, so that it stays within the vertical confines of the porch, existing porch. Compliance would preclude common use. Literal interpretation would deprive the applicant of uses commonly enjoyed by other similar properties in the same district. Mr. Holman has testified that he believes that there are other properties in this and around his home in the neighborhood that do have porches that are enclosed and appear to be much closer to the street than, or to setback lines than his would be. And so if others are enjoying that type of use on similar properties, then that would preclude common use. Granting of the variance will not confer on the applicant any special privilege denied to other lands or structures with the same zoning. Again, if you have other homes that are already have enclosed porches that exceed the setback lines in this district, then it would not be a special privilege. It would be the same as those existing homes. Self-created hardship. Mr. Holman did not create the porch, and he did not situate the home where it currently exists. And so I do not think that this is a case where he or his family have created or caused to be created a situation which would necessitate the issuance of a variance. And is it consistent with the intent of the ordinance? The granting of the variance will be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the article and will not be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to the public welfare. I think keeping it within the confines of the existing porch and from the rendering that we have, if that is close to the what it's going to be constructed, then that would enhance the property's aesthetic qualities and would be in harmony with the general purpose and intent of the article and would not injure the neighborhood or otherwise be detrimental to the public welfare. It's not causing a safety issue. There's no lighting involved.
Behind the tree, not even really visible.
Right, it's off. It's still back from the intersection and the circle there. So I think that that would be consistent with the intent. So, okay. So the unique condition of the property would be the, not only the age of the property and its location on a corner, but also the existence of the existing porch that exceeds the setback line and would result in a peculiar, unusual difficulty in trying to enclose the porch, but not go over the setback line. You'd be leaving that 5 feet out on the front and 2 feet on the back, on the side, which would seem to be, you know, an unusual difficulty that you wouldn't do that. Somebody would not build and enclose a porch and cut off that much of the property, that much of the porch.
Chairman, so it's part, you're probably going to want to include part of it in the decision in order, which you want to mention on the record peculiarity of the configuration of the porch, that it sticks just 2 feet out beyond the existing front wall of the house. And if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't even be here.
Right. That's a good, yes, you did mention that in the beginning. So that is something that is even more unusual in that the porch exceeds the linear horizontal line of the side of the home facing Summit. It goes beyond that. So if, yeah, as Mr. Bachmiller pointed out, if that was inside that, by 2 feet and lined up with the side of the house, he could do what he is asking without that. So that also seems to be unusual enough, especially because he didn't create that, he didn't build it, that it is even more peculiar and unusual for him to have to overcome that. So I don't think we need any special conditions other than, you know, they maintain the vertical lines of the windows and the doors to not exceed the current location of the porch. And
Your standard boilerplate conditions.
Yep.
In accordance with testimony.
yep, in accordance with testimony. And the, you know, reasonably close to what the documentation has provided as well. Okay, we're good on that. Take a motion.
I make a motion to approve the variance as requested based on the testimony evidence presented.
Okay, with the standard conditions, seconded, all in favor? Aye. Okay, 3-0. All right, thank you very much. The decision and order, as I mentioned, won't come out for a little while. So if you do choose to proceed at this point, you know, you're, you might want to wait for the DNO.
Yeah, I'm looking to have it done in the next few days. Technically, we have 45 days, but I want to get it off my desk. And I will sign off on the permit knowing that this has been approved. But the problem is that,
Yeah, you can start to prep.
yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is that in theory, an aggrieved party could appeal this written decision for 30 days after. So anything that you do in advance of that, you're kind of doing at your own risk, but there's nobody here to oppose it. So the likelihood of somebody
unlikely.
doing that is somewhere between slim and none, but it still exists. So,
All right?
We need to take the signs down now.
yes.
Yes.
Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Coming out in the middle of all this.
Sure. Yeah, we're glad to help. Okay. All right. Let's get this. Sure, all this is back in the
Would
right.
you like to adjourn?
Yes, we are adjourned. Thank you, Steve. I always forget that part.